They kept burying my bridge like it didn't exist, so I ended up shutting down their entire lakeside resort right before New Year's. And the worst part is, I don't even think they realized how bad they messed up until it was already too late. See, I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted to get across my own damn bridge without feeling like I was trespassing on my own land. But some people don't learn until you make the lesson expensive, and I guess I made it very expensive. I live in this small cedar cabin tucked along the edge of Blackwater Lake, the kind of place people from the city pay ridiculous money to visit for a weekend just to disconnect. You know, unplug, sit by the water, pretend they're rugged for 48 hours before going back to Wi-Fi and oat milk lattes. My place isn't fancy, never was, but it's mine, and it sits just across this narrow wooden bridge that crosses a shallow inlet feeding into the lake. One lane, old timber, creaks a little when you walk it, but it's held up through more winters than I can count. Up the hill behind me, maybe half a mile through the trees, there's this place called Pine Hollow Retreat. Big money, glass front cabins, heated docks, the kind of resort where the staff all wear matching fleece vests and talk like they've been trained to smile on command. It wasn't always like that. Used to be quieter when old man Carter owned it, but he sold it off about 5 years back to some investment group out of Seattle, and ever since then it's been different, louder, busier, and a whole lot less neighborly. Now, winter out there doesn't play nice. You get storms that roll in heavy and fast, dump a foot, sometimes two overnight, and if you don't stay ahead of it, you're stuck. I'm used to it. I've got my routines, shovel, salt, take it slow. But the resort, they run plows, big ones, the kind that clear roads like they're pushing waves. The first time it happened was early December, still dark out. I remember stepping outside with my coffee, expecting that quiet kind of morning where the snow absorbs every sound, and instead, I just stopped dead. Right at the entrance to my bridge, there was this wall of snow, not soft, not powder, but packed. Dense, like concrete, easily waist-high, maybe more in places, and it stretched across the entire width like someone had built a barricade overnight. At first, I just stood there, trying to make sense of it. Then I looked up the hill, saw the plow tracks leading straight from the resort road, curving right into my bridge entrance like it was part of their turnaround. I remember muttering something like, "You've got to be kidding me," because it felt too dumb to be intentional. So I grabbed my shovel and got to work. And let me tell you, clearing that kind of snow isn't just annoying, it's punishment. Every scoop feels like lifting wet cement, and after about 20 minutes, your back starts arguing with you. After an hour, it's basically screaming. It took me close to 3 hours just to carve out a narrow path, not even wide enough for anything but me walking sideways across that bridge. By the time I got back inside, soaked through my jacket, hands numb, I tried to talk myself down. Maybe it was a new driver. Maybe visibility was bad. Maybe nobody realized that wasn't part of their property. Things happen, right? I wasn't thrilled, but I wasn't ready to make it a thing either. Then the second storm hit. This one came harder. Overnight winds, heavier snowfall, the kind that rattles the windows. And I already had this uneasy feeling before I even opened the door, like I knew what I was about to see. And sure enough, there it was again, only this time worse. The pile was bigger, denser, pushed even further in, and when I got closer, I noticed something that made my stomach drop a little. One of the side rails on the bridge snapped clean through, like the weight had just been too much. That's when it stopped being an inconvenience and started feeling like a problem, a real one. I didn't even bother shoveling right away. I went back inside, grabbed my phone, and called the resort office. Took a couple tries before someone picked up. Front desk girl sounded half asleep, transferred me over to maintenance. And that's when I first heard his name, Travis Cole, maintenance manager. He answered like I was interrupting something more important, short, clipped tone, maintenance. I said, "Yeah. Hi. This is Aaron Pike. I live down by the inlet, across the wooden bridge. Your plow crew just dumped half a parking lot worth of snow onto my access point. Again, and now the bridge is damaged." There was this pause, not long, just enough to feel like he was deciding how seriously to take me. Then he goes, "Our guys are clearing within resort boundaries." I remember tightening my grip on the phone a little, trying to keep it calm. "Well, then your boundaries are off, because that snow is sitting on my bridge entrance." Another pause. Then he says, almost casually, "If that's the case, your structure's probably too close to our turnaround." And I just blinked, standing there in my kitchen, snow melting off my boots onto the floor, thinking, did he really just say that? I let out a small laugh, not because it was funny, but because sometimes that's all you can do, and I said, or maybe your plow driver shouldn't be treating my property like an extension of your driveway. His tone didn't change, not even a little. I'll make a note of it. And that was it. No apology, no offer to fix the damage, just a note. I hung up, stood there for a second, listening to the quiet hum of the fridge, and something shifted, just slightly, not anger exactly, but clarity. Because now it didn't feel like an accident anymore. It felt like they just didn't care. And that's when I decided I was going to find out exactly where my land ended and where theirs didn't. So the next morning, before the sun had fully burned through that gray winter sky, I made a couple calls, not angry, not yelling, just very clear, very focused. I reached out to a local surveyor I'd heard about through a neighbor years back, older guy named Walter Hensley, the kind of man who still carried a paper notebook and trusted his measurements more than any GPS unit. When I explained the situation, he didn't react much, just said, I'll bring my crew out. We'll see what's what. Like this wasn't his first boundary dispute, and probably not even his 10th. They showed up 2 days later, 3 of them, bundled up in heavy coats, setting up tripods, marking lines, pacing distances like they were mapping out something much bigger than a strip of snowy land. I stood off to the side most of the time, watching, hands shoved into my pockets, trying not to get my hopes up too much, because part of me still thought maybe this would come back messy. Unclear, one of those gray areas where nobody really wins. But then Walter waved me over. He pointed with the tip of his pen to a line of small flags they'd planted in the snow, bright orange against all that white, and said, your property line runs right here, cuts across that slope, and ends just before the bridge deck begins. Then he tapped a little further uphill, toward the resort side, and that path they've been using, that's crossing about 5 feet into your land. I followed the line with my eyes, tracing it through the trees, and suddenly everything made a lot more sense. The angle of the plow tracks, the way the snow had been pushed, even the damage to the railing. It wasn't careless, it was convenient. They weren't just dumping snow there. They were using that strip as part of their turnaround, maybe even more than that. I asked him, you sure about this? Walter gave me that look people give when they've done something long enough to not need to prove it. Son, I've been doing this 35 years. That line isn't moving. That's when things stopped being uncertain and started becoming strategic. I paid them, thanked them, and once they left, I just stood there for a while, staring at those flags, feeling that slow, steady shift from frustration to something sharper. Not revenge exactly, but resolve. Because now I knew something they either didn't know or hoped I wouldn't find out. That afternoon, I dug into the old paperwork I had from when I bought the cabin. It wasn't much, just a stack of folders the previous owner had handed over in a cardboard box, most of it outdated receipts, hand-drawn maps, random notes, but buried in there, tucked between a faded utility bill and an old insurance form, I found something interesting. A single-page document, signed, dated about 10 years back. It was a temporary access agreement. Apparently, one winter, the resort, back when it was still owned by Carter, had some kind of road collapse further up the hill, and they'd asked for permission to reroute emergency vehicles across that same strip of land. Just for the season, just until repairs were done. The document was clear, handwritten, but legible. It granted limited access, and more importantly, it had an end date. That part mattered, because without an end date, things can get messy. People start claiming long-term use, implied rights, all kinds of legal gray areas. But with a defined expiration, it's different. Clean. Contained. Over. I sat back in my chair, reading it again, slower this time, letting it sink in, and I remember thinking, well, that changes things. So I made copies, clean scans, attached them to an email, and sent it directly to the resort's management office. Attention to ownership, not Travis, not maintenance. I wanted this to land higher up. My message was simple, no threats, no attitude, just facts. I explained that their current operations were crossing onto my property, that any previous permission had expired years ago, and that effective immediately, I expected all use of that land to stop, including snow dumping, vehicle access, everything. I also mentioned the damaged bridge rail, and that I expected it repaired. Then I hit send. Now, I didn't expect an apology, but I did expect some kind of response. And I got one faster than I thought. Not from management, though. From a lawyer. The email came through the next morning, formal tone, long paragraphs, the kind of language designed to sound intimidating without actually saying much at all. He acknowledged my concerns, then went on to suggest that the resort's continuous and uninterrupted use of that path over several years may have established what he called an implied easement. I'll admit, for about 10 seconds, that gave me pause. Because it sounded official, and when something sounds official, you start wondering if maybe you're missing something. So I didn't respond. I forwarded the email, along with the old agreement, to a lawyer a friend of mine had recommended, a woman named Claire Donovan. Sharp, no nonsense, the kind of person who reads things once and already knows where the weak points are. She called me later that afternoon. First thing she said was, "They're bluffing." Just like that. No hesitation. She explained it in a way that made it feel almost obvious that any claim of implied access falls apart the moment there's documented evidence of temporary, conditional permission. Because you can't claim something was permanent when there's proof it was meant to end. Then she added, almost casually, "If anything, they've been trespassing." I leaned back in my chair when she said that, let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Trespassing. That word carries weight. So we drafted a response. Short, precise, and a lot less polite than my first message. It stated clearly that any further use of my land would be considered intentional trespass, not misunderstanding, not oversight, intentional, and that any resulting damages or interference would be pursued accordingly. We sent it that evening, and that's when things started to shift. Travis called me the next day. Different tone this time, still trying to sound in control, but there was something under it now, something tighter. He said, "Look, Aaron, I think this whole thing's gotten a little blown out of proportion." I didn't respond right away, just let the silence hang for a second. Then I said, "My bridge is damaged, my access has been blocked twice, and your legal team is trying to claim rights to my land. So yeah, I'd say it's proportionate." He sighed, like he was dealing with a difficult customer instead of a neighbor. That access route's been in use for years. Nobody raised an issue before. I walked over to the window, looked out at the flagged lines still marking the boundary. That doesn't make it yours. Another pause. Then he tried a different angle. "We can probably work something out. Maybe some kind of shared use agreement." And there it was, the first hint that they were starting to realize the position they were in. But here's the thing, at that point, it wasn't about working something out anymore. Not yet. Because they still hadn't fixed the bridge. They hadn't acknowledged the damage. And more importantly, they hadn't actually stopped using the path. I saw fresh tracks that morning. So I told him, calmly, "You should probably focus on stopping your crews from crossing my land before we talk about anything else." He didn't like that. I could hear it in the way his voice tightened again. "We'll look into it." And then he hung up. Now, maybe if they had stopped right there, fixed what they broke, came back with something reasonable, maybe things would have gone differently. But they didn't. Because 2 nights later, after another heavy snowfall, I woke up, walked outside, and saw those same tracks again, cutting straight across that flagged line like it didn't exist. And that's when I realized they weren't going to stop until I made it impossible for them not to. So that morning, standing there in the cold with fresh tire tracks cutting across those bright orange flags like they were invisible, something in me just settled. Not snapped, not exploded, settled. Because at that point it wasn't confusion, it wasn't miscommunication, it wasn't even arrogance anymore. It was a choice. They knew exactly where the line was, and they were choosing to cross it anyway. And once you understand that, you stop asking nicely. I didn't call Travis again. Didn't send another email. I just went back inside, poured myself another cup of coffee, sat at the table for a minute, and started thinking about leverage. Not emotion, not getting even, but leverage. What did they actually need that ran through my land? And how badly did they need it? The answer came together quicker than I expected. That strip wasn't just a convenient turnaround. It was part of their winter access route, especially for the service vehicles. Fuel deliveries, maintenance trucks, emergency access if something went wrong up by the lake-facing cabins, all of that depended on being able to cut through that section. Without it, they'd have to reroute around the back forest road, and I knew that road. Narrow, uneven, half-buried most of the winter, easily a 2-mile detour, maybe more in bad conditions. In other words, slow, expensive, and unreliable. And timing was everything. because we were less than a week out from New Year's. Now, if you've never been around a place like Pine Hollow during that week, it's their Super Bowl. Every cabin booked, premium rates, guests flying in from all over, expecting everything to be perfect, heated walkways, seamless service, no delays, no inconvenience. That's where they make a huge chunk of their annual revenue. And right then, they were leaning on a piece of land they didn't own to keep all of that running smoothly. I finished my coffee, grabbed my phone, and made one more call, this time to a marine construction outfit about 40 minutes out. Good crew, known for dock work, shoreline reinforcement, things that needed to hold up against water, ice, pressure. I'd used them once years ago for some minor repairs. The owner, guy named Rick Morales, picked up. I said, "Rick, I need something installed fast. Solid, permanent, no wiggle room." He chuckled a little. "That sounds serious. What are we talking about?" I looked out the window at that strip of land, the flag line cutting clean through it. "I need 6 steel mooring posts, set in concrete, right along a surveyed boundary." There was a short pause. Then he said, "One of those jobs." "Yeah," I said, "one of those." He didn't ask a lot of questions after that, just told me he could get a crew out the next day, weather permitting. And he did. They showed up early, trucks rumbling down the road, equipment clanking, the kind of noise that carries in cold air. I stepped outside as they started unloading, and for a second, I just watched. There's something about seeing a plan turn into action that makes it feel real in a different way. Rick walked over, nodded toward the flags. "This your line?" "Every inch of it," I said. He gave a small grin. "All right then, let's make it visible." They worked most of the day, drilling, setting, pouring. Each post went in deep, reinforced, waist-high above the snow, spaced just right so nothing larger than a person could slip through. By the time they were done, it wasn't subtle, it was a statement. Clean, solid, undeniable. That strip of land was closed. I paid them, thanked them, and as their trucks pulled away, the place went quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not passive, intentional. It didn't take long. The first call came in less than an hour. Travis didn't even bother with a greeting this time, just went straight into it, voice tight. "What the hell did you put up out there?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, calm. "Boundary markers. You've blocked our access road." "No," I said. "I've secured my property." There was a sharp exhale on the other end. "Aaron, you can't just." "I can." I cut in, not raising my voice, just firm, and I did. "You've had multiple notices. You chose to ignore them." Silence, then a lower tone, controlled. "This is going to cause serious operational issues." I shrugged, even though he couldn't see it. "Sounds like something you should have thought about before using land that wasn't yours." He didn't respond to that, just said, "We need to fix this." And that was the moment. Not when they blocked my bridge, not when they damaged it, but right there, when your problem finally became, "We need to fix this." I said, "You had your chance to fix it. Now we're talking about something else." He didn't like that answer, but he also didn't hang up. Instead, he said, "I'll have ownership reach out." "Good," I said, and ended the call. By that evening, things were already unraveling on their side. I could see it from my place, lights moving, vehicles stopping short, backing up, trying to figure out alternate routes. Word travels fast in a place like that, especially when something disrupts the routine. The next morning, I heard from a guy I knew who did seasonal work up there. Said they were scrambling, fuel delivery couldn't get through, maintenance crews were running late, and guests were starting to notice. One family in particular, apparently high profile, had booked one of the Lakeview cabins for 5 nights, premium package, the whole experience. When their luggage had to be hauled through knee-deep snow because the service vehicles couldn't make it through, they canceled. Just like that. And that kind of cancellation, it echoes. Because it tells every other guest that something's off. By day 2, Travis was calling again, then leaving messages. By day 3, it wasn't just him. The owner called. Different energy entirely. Controlled, polished, but you could hear the pressure underneath. He introduced himself, thanked me for taking the call, and got straight to it. "We'd like to discuss a resolution." I said, "I'm listening." First offer came quick, $20,000 for permanent access. I didn't even pause. No. There was a slight shift in his tone, recalibrating, 40. I looked out at those steel posts, standing solid against the snow, Still no. Another pause, longer this time. Because here's the thing, every hour that passed, every guest that complained, every delay, it was costing them more than those numbers. And they knew it. We didn't talk again that day, or the next, but I could feel it building. Then on the 5th day, he called back. This time, no small talk. 110,000, he said, steady, for a 15-year winter access easement. I stayed quiet. He continued, we'll cover a full rebuild of your bridge, reinforce steel supports, upgraded materials, install heated snowmelt systems at the entrance, protective barriers to prevent plow impact, and we'll include a penalty clause. Any future encroachment, any snow pushed onto your side, automatic financial penalty. That got my attention. Not just the money, but the structure of it. The acknowledgement. The fact that everything I'd been dealing with was now being written into terms they couldn't ignore later. I asked, and repairs for the current damage? Included, he said immediately. I walked outside while he was still on the line, boots crunching over the snow, stopped at the edge of the bridge, looked down its length, then back at those posts. And I thought about the last few weeks, the early mornings, the shoveling, the phone calls, the way this all started with something so small and got pushed and pushed until it turned into this. Finally, I said, draft it up. We finalized everything within 48 hours. Papers signed, work scheduled, money transferred. And just like that, the same strip of land they treated like it didn't matter became one of the most expensive pieces of ground they'd ever relied on. Now here's the part one still think about sometimes. Could I have handled it differently? Maybe. Could they have? Definitely. Because at the end of the day, this didn't start as a legal battle. It started with a pile of snow and a decision to ignore the person it affected. And that's usually how these things go. Small disrespect, left unchecked, turns into something a whole lot bigger. So I'm curious, what would you have done? Would you have taken the first offer, tried to keep the peace, or done exactly what I did and let it play out until they felt it? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you think. And if you've ever dealt with neighbors, property disputes, or situations where someone just wouldn't listen until it cost them, I want to hear that too. And yeah, if you enjoy stories where patience turns into leverage and leverage turns into something a little poetic, stick around. There's more coming.